Now, across Texas, the issue is.
I'm Rudy Koski in Austin.
I'm Greg Grugan in Houston. Stephen Dial has the day off, and this is Texas, the issue is.
The issue for discussion is an all too familiar topic, the Texas power grid. The head of ERCOT says the grid will have enough power supply to meet demand this summer. This bright outlook comes after a gloomy report in February that warned of a fast approaching power shortage. ERCOT CEO Pablo Vegas spoke to me about the positive outlook and why his optimism goes beyond the summer months.
Yeah, we do have enough power. The grid is ready for that. We've been doing our inspections for the summer season. Some people may not know, but we actually inspect the power plants and the transmission substations in the winter and the summer both. So we want to make sure that they're ready to run in the peak heat and the peak cold. And so we've done over 3,000 inspections since this program started. That was something that came out of Winter Storm Uri, a new formal program that ERCOT administers. And the inspections are showing that the operators are taking this very seriously, that they're readying their power facilities in order to be able to operate during the peak summer heat.
You know, we heard all about how the Texas power plants are really built for the hot Texas summer. But with that said, and with those inspections, any problems, any issues that you saw that you say, I got to address this?
But I can tell you there's been nothing significant or concerning that makes me think this is going to be a problem. We're not going to be able to deal with this summer.
We just wrapped up the legislative session, and state lawmakers really put an emphasis on natural gas plants, fed plants. But we do know that solar and wind have played a big role in getting us through some peak periods and times. Are you happy in how this new triplet type situation is merging together and then throwing in batteries?
Yeah, absolutely. What we're finding is that each of the different supply resources, whether it's wind or solar, whether it's the traditional gas, nuclear, or coal, or the brand new batteries that we're starting to see quite a lot of growth on in our system, all of them are bringing something unique to the game.
Are you worried that lawmakers are a little bit too much focused on natural gas? Are you worried about that kind of rhetoric?
No, because I think what's really underlying it is a desire for balance. We've seen predominantly almost limited to wind and solar and batteries growing on the ERCOT grid over the last 5 years, and very little natural gas. And so I think legislators and policymakers are concerned about this imbalance for the long term.
You mentioned the growth, and back in February, ERCOT caused a little bit of a stir by saying power demand could nearly double by 2030. Supply could fall short by 6% by the summer of 26, and even wider gap in 29. Does that report still hold?
The core growth story is still the same. So we still expect tremendous economic growth. A lot of it is driven by data centers. You've heard the discussions about artificial intelligence and the amount of energy demand that uses. That continues to be at the center of the focus and the center of the story. However, the legislature made some really important changes during this last session. They passed a bill called Senate Bill 6. And what Senate Bill 6 did is it kind of defined the rules of the road for how data centers would perform and operate in the ERCOT grid. And one of the key requirements is that data centers, which happen to be built, they all are built with backup generation on site. Those backup generation facilities, if the grid were to get into an emergency condition and be very scarce, those data centers would come off of the grid and use their backup generation. That's now put into law, and that's something that is a game changer when it comes to reliability. And so that provision, once implemented, is going to, I think, pave the pathway for safe growth on the data center side, and that's going to really change the picture of that forecast. I think it's going to change the reliability and improve the numbers when we do our next update.
Are you confident that the locals are ready for the summer?
Yeah, I think there were a lot of lessons learned, Rudy, a lot of lessons learned as to how to do better, how to communicate better, how to prepare better, how to manage vegetation better, how to stage people when there is an issue and respond more quickly. I saw a lot of lessons learned come out of the experiences from last summer, and I do believe that our utility partners are ready for the summer weather ahead of us.
Illuminating. Well, that's too easy of a word for that interview, so I'll build off what Vegas had to say, and that was balance, and go with teetering. Greg, what's your word?
I'm going to go with scarcity.
Yeah, I'll go with that too. Now, with that, we'll take a break and then we'll come back. Political analyst and business analyst Bill King will join our Power Talk about the grid. Welcome back. Sitting in for our friend Stephen Dial is our other friend, Bill King. He is a Houston businessman, columnist, and a fellow at Rice University's Baker Institute. The issue for us is ERCOT's rosy outlook this summer for the state power grid. ERCOT CEO Pablo Vegas has the tough job of keeping the lights on statewide, and he admits local utilities also have to do their job, do their part, help protect the lines. Greg, this time last year, thousands of people were in the dark in the Houston area after powerful storms hit there and knocked out electricity. Vegas said lessons were learned, but have the reforms there really improved grid confidence for the summer?
Rudy, CenterPoint dug itself a pretty deep credibility hole in the aftermath of Hurricane Beryl, which exposed a colossal deficit of due diligence when it came to clearly identified resilience measures like cutting back vegetation away from lines. Rudy, as you pointed out, folks here were steaming hot, both literally and figuratively, thoroughly hacked off that a utility with a guaranteed monopoly profit would shortchange preparation to possibly juice its bottom line. CenterPoint has spent much of the last year attempting to rebuild public confidence and assure angry elected officials that lessons have been learned and substantial investments made. Of course, when you live on the Gulf Coast, there's only so much you can do. So bottom line, most Houstonians are both hopeful and skeptical at the same time that genuine, demonstrable progress has been made when it comes to keeping the lights on when heavy weather hits. And that's the only known quantity here. Sooner or later, that heavy weather will come.
Right, yeah. You know, local power failures are still linked to ERCOT and the statewide grid. That may not be exactly a fair linkage, but the blame game, that happens. Bill, did Governor Greg Abbott do enough to insulate himself by dropping the hammer on CenterPoint?
Well, obviously, all the statewide officials were really worried about CenterPoint and the impression that they were making on the public. I think it is important to understand that when you talk about reliability of the grid, we're really talking about two things: generating the electrons to be pushed out over the wires, and then the distribution system to get those electrons to your house or business so that you can actually use it. ERCOT really only has control over the generation part of that. The distribution is actually regulated by the Public Utility Commission. And so there was a lot of focus on that. Houston has a particular problem because we built most of our distribution system above ground in Houston, at least back decades ago. And one thing we do really good here in Houston is grow trees. And trees and aerial power lines don't work very well together. And so CenterPoint had really not kept up its maintenance of those lines like they should have. You know, we see this every decade or so. There'll be a big shortage. The last one was back in Ike. CenterPoint will get busy. They'll kind of catch up and do a lot of work. And then people kind of forget about it and we go back to our old ways. I think probably we can count on things being better the next couple of years. What I worry about is 6 or 7 years from now, are we going to go back to the same old thing all over again?
Yeah, I think the sentiment up in the Dallas area is also the same thing. You know, Vegas thinks the new rules requiring backup generation at sites at data centers, those places, will help reduce the coming supply gap and allow them to scale back the warning that ERCOT issued back in February. Greg, let's say we get through the summer with no grid issues. We still have this power plant gap problem with older plants aging out, which is my word, was teetering, right?
Yeah, it's a problem. New gas-fired generation requires massive capital investment, and after years of watching government subsidize wind and solar, there just aren't a lot of folks out there chomping at the bit to risk billions to participate in a market that's not fair or profitable. And we are witnessing the impact of that uneven playing field, with the Texas taxpayer now forced to fund incentives to lure investment in traditional dispatchable natural gas generation in a state that just happens to be the biggest natural gas producer in the nation. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. Now that said, I hope a growing portion of the Texas energy equation includes modular, reliable nuclear plants. And to their credit, state lawmakers this session made a stab at getting the ball rolling with a $350 million investment. Hey, stay with us. On the other side of this break, we're going to talk about the move to close Texas primaries. Welcome back. Many Republicans in the Lone Star State, including party leaders, have intensified the call to initiate closed primaries, elections in which only clearly identified members of the Texas GOP can participate. I spoke with Rice University political scientist Mark Jones about the near-term prospect and the ramifications of limiting primary participation to self-identified partisans. Mark, we're getting reporting that the Republican Party of Texas is pushing harder now to make closed primaries a reality. Is that even possible?
No, the Republican Party of Texas is a day late and a dollar short. If they wanted to change the rules regarding primaries, they had a great opportunity to do that. That was during the 2025 regular legislative session that ran from January towards early June. That time is now passed. The only way that you could actually restrict primaries to Republicans via closed primary system, which is used in many states throughout the country, is to change the legislation that governs elections in Texas. You'd have to do two things in particular. First, we don't have partisan registration here in Texas, so there is no such thing as a registered Republican or a registered Democrat in the Lone Star State. You would thus have to change the voter registration legislation to have a box where people can check Republican, Democrat, or something else. Secondly, then you would have to change the laws regarding primary elections to include the ability of parties to restrict their elections to closed or open or semi-open. There are a lot of different options.
If you have a closed primary, is that a healthy environment in terms of including what is a growing segment of the population that identifies as independent?
Right. The principal knock against closed primaries is that they just increase the level of extremism and polarization in our society today because they restrict the primaries to the hyper-partisans, and those hyper-partisans tend to hold more extreme positions, more conservative on the Republican side, more progressive on the Democratic side. So if you did adopt closed primaries in Texas, you would just make the primaries lean even more to the right on the Republican side and even more to the left on the Democratic side, and reduce the need for anyone to appeal to independents outside of general elections. And even there, with our gerrymandered districts, in most districts, the election is, for all intents and purposes, decided in the primary. In the Texas State Senate, right now you could say that only one of the 31 districts is competitive in November.
So let me get this right. Barring a special session, the first chance that either party would have to close their primary would be after the next regular session of the legislature.
Barring a special session where the governor calls a special session and puts on the special session agenda modifying the primary election legislation, the next time opportunity to actually change the rules of the game would be during the 2027 legislative session for the 2028 elections. So right now, the Republican Party of Texas talking about this, it's either doing it purely for symbolic reasons to sort of raise the issue, or it demonstrates a very sort of clear lack of understanding of Texas election law. The only way that you could effectively have partisan registration where you could ensure all registered Republicans were eligible to vote in 2028 was requiring every one of the close to 20 million Texans to re-register.
So is the process of attempting to close primaries, in a sense, disenfranchisement for those Texans who don't want to declare either way?
No, without question, if you adopt closed primaries, you're effectively disenfranchising from the primary process anyone who isn't a hyper-partisan with one party or the other, and that includes many independents or people who really just don't have a strong partisan opinion or support a minor party.
Okay, guys, according to Dr. Jones, closed Texas primaries are highly unlikely, at least in the near future. Bill, you've written about the balkanization of Texas politics and outsized influence of hardcore zealots in both parties. Do you agree with Jones that limiting primary participation to members only effectively disenfranchises millions of Texans?
Right, and here's the part that Mark left out. In Texas, it's very difficult to run as an independent, and it's very difficult to organize a third party under our election laws. So effectively, what you would have is two very small groups. You'd get down to probably 5 or 10% of the electorate on the side, deciding who the other 80% of us that don't like either political party get to vote for in November. And I just think that's fundamentally wrong.
All right, Dr. Jones says closing primaries would require passage of substantial legislation. Rudy, do you detect any genuine enthusiasm among Republican lawmakers to push this through, or is this just one of those red herring initiatives they publicly claim to support but privately oppose because it hands the radicals more power?
You know, Greg, this has been a long sub-issue for a long time, but certainly became a poor loser issue, if you may remember, after Speaker Dade Phelan won his reelection bid and all the complaining about the crossover voting that happened there. Now it seems to be a possible attempt to create a boogeyman, maybe, for the Texas GOP as we approach the primary campaign season. Could be a rallying cry for party hardliners who support Ken Paxton in his bid to take the U.S. Senate nomination away from incumbent John Cornyn. You know, polling indicates Cornyn's going to need independents and moderates to show up to win the primary race. So maybe it's more election red meat rhetoric than political red herring, but it's certainly interesting political theater.
All right, nice play on words there, Rudy. All right, Bill King, you are a self-identified independent and have actively worked in the past to organize a third party. Could excluding nonpartisan independent voters from primaries potentially add some impetus to those hoping to formally organize in the political middle?
I think it could, because a lot of the independents kind of decide which is the least worst option here, and will go vote in the primaries to try to get more moderate people elected. So if you have no choice at all, then I think you might find people in the middle saying, you know, maybe we do need to get organized.
All right, Rudy, if we accept Mark Jones's assertion that formal membership registration pushes parties either further to the right or to the left, it doesn't bode too well for the practice of compromise. Agree or disagree?
Yeah, you know, compromise already is a political unicorn with the current political status quo. The extremists, you know, are already in the driver's seat for both main parties. Look, you know, that's why voter turnout really isn't that strong, especially in off presidential years. And we're already being driven off a political cliff by the extremists anyway. So maybe the best example that we've had is just what we just saw. The Democratic Party throwing the ultimate closed primary, you know, by throwing out all its primary votes and nominating a presidential candidate who didn't win a single contest. So maybe the best thing right now is for all political parties to have a closed candidate selection process. Pick your own candidate at a convention. Leave us alone during the primary season. Let us just enjoy the spring. And in the short term, maybe taxpayers can come back and say, you know, maybe we shouldn't be footing the bill or so much for these primary elections. Maybe it's time to get the political parties to pick up more of the cost, bring back that fee program that got struck down years ago, where taxpayers are being stuck with the bill for a lot of political primary rhetoric. And maybe that could help turn out in a general election, and maybe that could bring about a stronger independent, moderate third party, maybe, in the general election. Something's got to be addressed. I think the status quo, Greg, we just can't stick with that. What do you think?
Well, I'm going to ask Bill this. I mean, are these closed primaries potentially an enemy of what little compromise we see today?
Well, no elected official wants closed primaries, because, you know, they know that if they do that, they're going to be primaried by somebody that's more radical than they are. And the truth of the matter is, especially in the Texas House, you have to compromise on some things. We saw that. But I'm so glad that Rudy brought up this point, which I was wanting to make, which is, I don't think taxpayers understand this. The Texas taxpayers pay for the two parties' primary elections, which I've always thought is very strange. These are supposed to be private political associations, but yet they come to the taxpayers hat in hand saying, oh, we can't afford to run our own elections, so will you please pay for them?
Yeah, it's political welfare.
Absolutely. Rudy, take us to break.
All right, we still have a few more issues to deal with. We do have issues, and we'll take them up when we come back in a moment. All right, here we come back with our other issues that we have to want to talk about, and I'm going to bring us back to the ballpark. It's summertime, baseball season is here, and you know, we started the season with a big concern about those torpedo bats. Remember, cranking out all those home runs and all that mess. You know, that really kind of sunk those torpedo bats there for a while, but then I've noticed a trend lately. We sure have seen a whole lot of walk-off home runs and walk-off plays to end a lot of high-profile games lately as the season starts getting closer to the All-Star break. So here's my issue is we need some more pitchers. We need some more, you know, good, strong arms. We need another Nolan Ryan, right, to come up and save the day. Sink these torpedo bats and do a Robin Ventura slug against them, right? Bring back Nolan Ryan. That's my issue. Bill, what's your issue?
Well, by the way, Nolan Ryan holds the record for pitching the most pitches in a game at 239 pitches, if you can imagine that. My issue this week is I recently wrote a column. This is something I've been writing about for years, is about how terrible we are at actually catching criminals. There's a statistic called the clearance rate, which is the number of people that commit a crime that we actually catch somebody for doing it. They're all terrible. The one that really bothers me is rape. In Texas, we only catch about 1 in 4 rapists. I think that's outrageous.
All right, my issue is more of a fascination, the MAGA bromance bust-ups. You know, first we had Elon and Trump breaking up, and then this week it was Tucker Carlson and Ted Cruz. I mean, what's going on? It's like a soap opera. All right, we're going to leave it there.
Yeah.
You can see the interview or any of our past interviews by going to our YouTube pages and keep the conversation going on social media.
And don't forget to let us know what you think the issue is.